Hey everyone, so with the 3.6 Genshin patch, we now have 3 new characters in the Genius Invocation TCG. We've got Itto, Ayato, and also Tighnari. I know I asked the community what character you want deck guide for. People say Itto, people say Ayato, nobody said Tighnari, but the reality is I already have a Tighnari deck that I was testing. It felt like a Quicken piercing deck would have been the easiest kind of build to experiment with. And I was actually pretty happy with the results. So in today's guide, we are going to be reviewing Tighnari first as a character, what his specialization does, and then we're going to be looking at a Quicken Pierce deck. But of course, after today's video, we will also be experimenting, brewing with some decks with Itto and Ayato, and yeah, see if we can get some fun decks out of those as well. So let's get into the video and let's look at Tighnari as a character. So I really like the introduction of Tighnari as another dendro character in the TCG game because right now for dendro cores we only have Collei and the Jade Plume Quicken Chicken thing. So if you want to build a dendro core team, you're only pretty much stuck with Quicken Chicken. But now with Tighnari involved, you can now build a dendro Tighnari Collei core, you can build a Tighnari Chicken core, or you can just stick with Collei and Chicken if you really want to. But I think it's just healthy for the game to have more variations, more things to play with, more tools to play with. So let's look at Tighnari as a character, what makes him special, what his different skills are, and what makes him stand out apart from Collei and Quicken Chicken, and whether you should be using Tighnari or Collei. So with his normal attack, nothing so special, he just deals 2 physical damage, but his elemental skill is actually something that is really special about Tighnari as a unit, because you will be able to do 2 dendro damage, and this character also gains Fischl Suffusion. And what is Fischl Suffusion? It is actually kind of like a passive ability that he gains. So basically whenever Tighnari, if he has this Suffusion in place, if he deals a charge attack, the physical damage dealt will be converted into dendro damage, and after the skill damage is finalized, you'll be able to summon 1 Cluster Bloom Arrow. So before we look at what Cluster Bloom Arrow is, just to remind all of us, what is a charge attack? Charge attack is basically, if you have an even number of elemental dice, your normal attack will be considered a charge attack. So this charge attack concept was something they introduced with Glee, I think about 2 batches ago, and it's interesting to see how they continue to innovate with charge attack mechanics. So this is a pretty cool elemental skill, because essentially it is saying that Tighnari is not bound to only dealing dendro damage through the use of 3 elemental dice in this elemental skill. He can also deal dendro damage through his normal attack with just 1 aligned dendro dice and 2 unaligned dice. And this is really good because it makes Tighnari a consistent Quicken refresher. As you know, with Quicken decks, you would want to have lots of applications of dendro and Electro, right? So the more times you can do dendro easily, the better it is for your Quicken, because the more Quicken buffs you can get out of it, right? So this is the first reason why I really like this elemental skill. The second reason why I really like this elemental skill is because at the end of your charge attack, it doesn't matter whether you made an elemental reaction or not, as long as you commit a charge attack with Tighnari after you use Suffusion, you will gain 1 Cluster Bloom Arrow. And Cluster Bloom Arrow is basically an end phase 1 damage dendro attack. If you play your cards right, this should be 2 attack, or rather 2 damage, with the use of the Quicken buff. So this is something that really sets Tighnari apart from Collei, because basically Tighnari is very good at dealing consistent dendro damage, refreshing your Quicken buffs, and then the second thing that I really like about Tighnari is that he is able to do Quicken damage without you having to draw for specific cards. Because for Collei, if you recall, in most Quicken Collei decks, if you want to deal big damage with Collei, you'll need to draw her talent skill, because the talent skill says, oh, if you do a dendro related elemental reaction, you'll be able to deal +1 dendro damage. But Tighnari's damage is, or rather Tighnari's skill is a lot more forgiving. It's essentially just saying, as long as you deal a charged normal attack, you can have this extra dendro damage. So I actually prefer Tighnari a lot more than Collei in this instance, in this particular team, because this can help your team to refresh the Quicken buff and chip down your opponent's damage very consistently. So I like Cluster Bloom Arrow. One thing to note is that Cluster Bloom Arrow can stack up to 2 stacks. So when you use Suffusion, you have basically, or rather when you use the elemental skill, you get Suffusion. Suffusion has 2 usages, and this basically just means that if you use 2 charge attack in one row, you'll be able to get 2 Cluster Bloom arrows, right? So it will be able to hang around for the next 2 end phases. So yeah, this makes Tighnari super interesting as a unit, and I genuinely prefer him over Collei. Next up, we have Tighnari's Elemental Burst. It is basically a mini version of Fischl and Keqing's Burst, because it deals 4 dendro damage and 1 piercing damage to all opposing characters. So this is pretty cool because it only costs 2 energy, so it's very easy to set up. So the kind of cycle that I like with Tighnari to do a lot of dendro and quicken damage is basically turn 1, set up the elemental skill, turn 2, use your charge attack, and then by turn 2 you can also use your elemental burst, therefore dealing lots of damage to your opponent, lots of dendro damage, lots of quicken damage, and also lots of little bit of piercing damage. So yeah, I like Tighnari as a unit, he's cool. But to me, what is not so cool is his talent card, his specialization card. It's called Keen Sight. I don't know, this might be controversial, I don't know if it's controversial, but I just don't really like this card because it costs 4 dendro dice to play. When you equip this, you'll be able to use your elemental skill once. And essentially, it is saying that if Tighnari has Suffusion active, the charge attack will cost 1 less, and therefore you'll be able to attack with Tighnari twice with 2 charge attack, and then you pass on, you can swap over to another character and use another attack there, and therefore fitting 3 hits into 1 turn. So the only reason why I don't like this card in this particular team that I have built Tighnari with is because this team is already very dice hungry. You already have a lot of characters that want to use 4 elemental dice, and I don't know, I just cannot afford to try to roll 4 dendro dice, have it with, and then, you know, have to resort to another plan. So I don't really like this particular card because I need to draw it, I need to set up for it through the charge attack, and then I really need to commit resources in order to play this and the charge attacks effectively. But I don't know, I'm still going to, so it's not featured in this particular deck guide today, but I'm still going to try to experiment with it. Maybe I could be wrong, maybe this is broken, maybe I'm just bad at ring decks with the first go, but yeah, try this out and let me know if you like it or not. But yeah, I don't run this right now. So let's get into the actual deck tag and look at the different heroes that we are playing alongside Tighnari. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a very basic Quicken piercing deck. If you've seen, you know, lots of different Collei Quicken decks, they all base themselves around the use of Collei, Fischl, and Keqing. And this is exactly what I've built this team to do as well. Mainly because this team has the ability to apply Quicken very consistently, and therefore having that 1 additional damage is super critical when it comes down to the wire. And also, all 3 characters are able to do piercing damage as well as part of their elemental burst, and therefore I really like the idea of sniping your opponent's characters off. So what you do is that basically you use Fischl's elemental skill to summon orbs lots of times, deal lots of electro damage across the board. You use Tighnari to use his elemental skill to apply dendro and create the situation whereby you can create quicken buffs, and then you use his charge attack to use the Suffusion to create the Cluster Bloom arrows, so they can have lots of powerful end of phase attacks. Because through the use of the Fischl and Tighnari Wombo combo, essentially you'll be able to do, I think it is 4 damage, right? 4 damage at the end of each turn. Yep, it will be. So assuming Quicken is on, which it should be, you will be dealing 4 damage to your opponent's character during the end phase, because Oz will be dealing 1 Electro plus 1 buff, and then Tighnari's Cluster Bloom will be dealing 1 Dendro plus 1 buff, and by having them work together, you'll also be able to refresh your Quicken and therefore get even more buffs for your active characters in the next round. And then I also have Keqing in the back just to finish the teams off, because Tighnari and Fischl are really good at chipping damage off your opponent's characters, and with Keqing's Elemental Burst and to do 4 electro damage and 3 piercing throughout the board, she will be able to pick up a lot of weak opponents that are just sitting in the back. So all in all, this is a pretty straightforward deck. It's a very aggressive deck that requires a little bit of switching around, a little bit of elemental reaction crafting, but most of all, it is very fun and I like it, and I like how fast paced it is. I don't think you ever get into a game whereby you play for 20 minutes and don't really know where the game is going. This is a fairly aggressive deck and super interactive deck. It's really fun. So yeah, that is basically the team. So in this video, I'll just be doing a very quick introduction on what Fischl and Keqing's roles are in this deck, because this is a pretty straightforward deck, and I'm sure a lot of you have already seen many different Quicken guides and have seen some other videos from me where I go through how I like to use Fischl and Keqing. So I'll just be very brief and just talk about their general traits and their various unique abilities. So for Fischl, I basically use her as a starter because I want to set up Knight Rider as soon as possible. Knight Rider is good because it deals electro damage to your opponent and therefore allows Tighnari to deal Quicken damage as soon as possible. The second thing is Oz is really good because during the end phase he deals 1 electro damage to your opponent's active character, which also sets up another big Tighnari Quicken reaction in the start of the next round. So yeah, I use Fischl as my starter to summon Oz and set up the stage for Tighnari. And most of all, she is also cool because she is, like Keqing, able to deal 4 elemental damage in her elemental burst and also deal 2 piercing damage to all of your opponent's characters. So I will think of Fischl as a starter that applies elemental damage, applies elemental pressure, and then also deal piercing damage to chip your opponent's standby characters down. So that is Fischl. And next up we have Keqing. So Keqing is a character that I've been playing a lot if you've seen my older videos, and I'm a big fan of because she is very powerful and she deals a lot of elemental damage and threat against the board. So I like Keqing because of her elemental skill. She is able to do 3 electro damage, and also with the Quicken buff this will easily go up to 4 damage. On top of that, when you use elemental skill, it creates 1 lightning stiletto. Lightning stiletto is really good because let's say you are in another character as your active character, for example Tighnari or Fischl, you'll be able to use lightning stiletto to teleport back into Keqing. And then the second thing is this will grant Keqing Electro Infusion, right? Which means that her physical damage will be turned into electro damage, and that's really good because it means that through the use of your Tighnari and Keqing combo, you'll be able to refresh your Quicken, and then you can use Keqing's normal attack as a electro attack that is buffed by Quicken instead, and therefore reducing your reliance on electro die. So I like Keqing for her ability to be a pretty flexible character to deal electro damage and also to teleport back to deal even more electro Quicken damage. And then finally, you have Elemental Burst, which I've already spoken about in the team section. It's just pretty cool because it deals 4 damage and 3 piercing to all characters on standby, which is pretty annoying. Now let's talk about the ideal starting hand. I will go into the rest of the deck in the later section, but for now, my ideal starting hand would be Katheryne, alright? Liben. I like Paimon. I like Liusu. I like Chang the Ninth, and I also like Reroll, or rather Toss Up. Yeah, Toss Up. Reroll is what you do with the toss-up. But yeah, any 5 of these 6 cards, maybe Katheryne, Liusu, Xiangling, toss-up, and either Paimon or Libin, right? So this is actually my ideal starting hand. Why? So actually, if you've kind of heard what I was trying to allude to earlier, right? This is a deck that really relies on creating elemental reaction through Dendro and Electro. As a result, you would want to be able to swap into characters as freely as you want to between Fischl to Tighnari to Keqing, etc, etc. And therefore, I think Katheryne is actually a really important part of the deck. On top of that, she's also received a buff in this patch 3.6. She used to cost 2 elemental dice, which is pretty costly because once you play her, you would probably be able to attack once more, swap into another character, and then not do anything. But now she only costs 1 to play, which is great because it means that you can easily set up for lots of fast action swaps. And yeah, just a big fan of her. Other than that, I like Liusu. Reason why I like Liusu is because he is able to charge up characters like Keqing very easily. So let's imagine the scenario whereby you have Fischl as your starter. Fischl attacks once, Tighnari attacks once, and then in your next turn, right, you can play Liusu, you swap over to Keqing, and then you play Calx's Art, and then Keqing's Elemental Burst will be on, and then you'll be able to do 4 damage to your opponent's active character, and also 3 piercing damage to your opponent's remaining characters, all in the span of just, under 1.5 turns. So I feel like Liusu has a lot of potential in this particular deck. And to a similar vein, that's kind of why I prefer Xiangling as well, because he just gives you free value, right? Because with this deck, you really expect to deal a lot of elemental reaction, and also you expect to deal quite a bit of piercing damage as well. So with him, you'll be able to draw cards, and card draw is good because it allows you to not just play those cards but also fix your dice if you find yourself on the shakier end of the deal and don't really have the different dice that you need to play Keqing's costly elemental burst, or to play Tighnari's elemental skill, or to play Fischl's elemental skill. So that is why I like Xiangling as well. And actually, the reason why I like Toss Up is exactly because of the scenario that I just mentioned. With Tighnari, most likely you want to play his elemental skill. With Fischl, you probably always want to play her elemental skill, and with Keqing, she deals the most damage with her elemental skill, and therefore you need a lot of aligned dice. And therefore, Toss Up is a really good start because, let's say turn 1, you roll really well. You don't need Toss Up, great, save it for the next turn. Or turn 1, you have the perfect hand. You have lots of things to set up with, but maybe your dice is just really lousy. You just don't get the right dice, don't get the right roll, right? So you just play Toss Up, fix your hand, and then you go to town with lots of damage. And then finally, my final choice, my 5th pick of the hand would be Paimon or Libin, because as I mentioned earlier, this is a dice hungry deck. You would need Paimon or Libin to give yourself some gas to deal as much damage as possible and to swap around as well. So yeah, Paimon, Libin, always really good with this deck. So that is my starting hand, or rather my ideal starting hand. Katheryne, Liusu, Xiangling, Toss Up, and either Libin or Paimon. So to give an example of what the ideal turn 1 looks like, I am just going to show a bit of a gameplay that we will be also reviewing towards the end of the video, but I just wanted to kind of show us what the starting turns could look like. So as mentioned earlier, I will always want to go first with Fischl, because I want to set up the ores and electro damage application throughout my opponent's board. So I roll for the dendro, which is great, but I need some electro as well, and this is perfect because it means that I can play ores and I can go over to Tighnari and play his dendro shenanigans. So basically on my turn, very easy turn, I just go over to ores, right, apply Electro to Xiangling, wait for my opponent to do their thing, while I also already know that I want to go into Tighnari once they pass turn over to me. So they switch over to Razor, and I switch over to Tighnari, and I'm not going to use my Leave It To Me for Katheryne over here, because I know that my opponent is not going to, they're just going to enter that, they're not going to attack, they only have 2, right? Also because they don't really have an elemental core. This is Electro, this is Pyro, and this is Dendro, and therefore I know that they are not going to play any sort of attack against me unless they eat the food that makes the normal attack cheaper. But essentially, they just go in to Razor, they eat the Dendro damage from my Tighnari's charge attack, or sorry, no, my Tighnari's elemental skill, which is pretty smart because they're just trying to spread out the kind of elemental application, right? But anyway, for my first turn, I do that and I'm set up for the next turn. And this is actually, it seems I'm not doing much, it's just 2/1/1 damage, but this is actually a good turn because next turn I will be able to use Tighnari's charge attack against their Tighnari to deal Quicken damage and also to create the plume arrow thing. Can't remember what the name is called now. So I didn't get the 3 Dendro dice that I really wanted to get, but that is fine. They use the charge attack and they create some burning, which is unfortunate, but yep, there we go. We will be able to use elemental skill, right? And more importantly, we will be able to create this little guy here. And as I mentioned earlier, why is this important? It is because now I have free reign to switch into any character, and then I'm also knowing that at the end of the turn, I'm very likely to be able to deal 4 damage through the use of Oz and through the use of this arrow. And that is great because if I can lower Tighnari down to 4 damage, if I can lower Xiangling down somehow, or if I can lower Razor down somehow, maybe through the use of Keqing's elemental skill, 3 + 1, right? He will be down to 4, and then he would die to this. So this means that by attacking one more time, at least 2 of their characters will be prone and vulnerable to lethal at the end of the phase. So it means that by the end of round 2, I will have a 1 character advantage if my Tighnari doesn't die. So yeah, this is the ideal turn 1 for me. All you want to do is to, get Quicken set up as soon as possible and apply pressure and take out one of their characters so that they can reduce the kind of rotations that they do. So yeah. So let's get into the different cards that we play in this deck. So for the equipment package, I have Keqing's Specialization. I really like this because it basically gives, it doesn't cost any extra. It costs the same as if Keqing were to play elemental skill. On top of that, if she gets Electro Infusion through the use of Lightning Stiletto, attack gains +1. And this is actually pretty good because it means that this physical damage, right? It will become infused with Electro. If I have Quicken buff, it deals 3 damage. And if I have this little talent card available as well, active as well, it will also +1 damage to Keqing as well. So for the measly cost of 1 Electro die and 2 unaligned dice, she'll be able to do 4 Electro damage, which is pretty powerful. Next up, I have Gambler's Earrings because, as I mentioned earlier, this is a very aggro team, so the more gas we can put to the team, the better, so Gambler's Earrings is a good add-on. And as much as we want this to be an aggro team, sometimes, you just might not draw the cards that you want. Sometimes your opponent has lots of different defenses, recovery, and you need to buy your time. You need to ensure that you are able to take some damage, soak up some damage before you launch the counter attack and get a tempo from your opponent. And with that in mind, that is why I play the Ancient Helm as well, because the Ancient Helm, as kind of proven since the previous batch, is a very annoying piece of artifact to play around. Essentially, it gives your character 2 shield points every single turn, which essentially heals your character for 2 HP every turn. So this can throw your opponent's burst calculations out the window and can be quite a menace really if your opponent doesn't manage to kill off that character that has the helm attached to in one turn, because this will refresh in the next round. So yeah, this is basically the equipment package. Next up, we have the dice package. We have Paimon, because you will be able to deal or rather create more Omni Element dice, which is always good for a team that is always trying to swap around because that costs dice, a team that is very greedy with their elemental aligned dice. And also, you know, Keqing uses 4 dice for Electro Burst, right? So the more dice you have, the better. So we've got Paimon, we've got Liban, we've got the Electro dice, and that's basically it for the dice package. Next up, we have some utility cards as well. I call this utility because they all have very, very unique purposes that don't really kind of interact with one another. So the first utility card, as I mentioned earlier, Katheryne. Do not sleep with Katheryne. She is a very, very good card right now. Not just for offensive purposes, right? She's good for offensive purposes because you can kind of swap around your character's quick action and do elemental reactions that your opponent wanted to avoid. She's also good for defensive reasons because let's say your opponent has dealt elemental reaction to one of the characters and threatens to do melt damage against you. Or what you can do with Katheryne is that you can quickly swap over to the next character. You can allow your next character to take the elemental hit so that you do not take any melt damage. So Katheryne is both a really good attacking and defensive card. In terms of other utility cards that we run as well, we've got Tighnari. I've already ran through him earlier. Good because he draws us cards. Cards are good because you can play them, or you can use them to fix your dice. Utility cards also include the swapping stuff. For example, leave it to me, so that your switch will be considered a fast action rather than a combat action. You've got changing shifts as well, because this is basically cheating an elemental die, right? Let's say you play one Woven Thunder to get one Electro die so that you can swap over to another character. Well, this basically does the same thing because it means that the next time you swap, you spend one elemental dice, which is really, really good. Final utility card that we have in here is Toss Up. Yeah, enough said. Toss Up. You can reroll 2 times. Really good for your characters in general since they are very, very dice hungry. I did consider running Fulfillment's Library at the start, but you know, with this deck, you really want to maximize the kind of damage you can create with your characters, and therefore the more dice you can spend on them, the less dice you can spend on the deck, the cards that you have, the better. So that is one reason why I didn't play Fulfillment's Library. And finally, we have the energy package as well. Energy package, as mentioned earlier, Liu Su is good because if you swap to another character who does not already have energy, they would gain 1 energy. This is actually really powerful if you kind of combine it with Kelter's Art. Kelter's Art shifts 1 energy from 2, at most 2 of your characters on standby to your active character. So these 2 combined are really good because let's say, the Keqing example, right? Fischl has 1 energy on, Tighnari has 1 energy on, Keqing doesn't have anything. You play Liu Su, you swap over to Keqing, and then you play Kelter's Art. Suddenly, Keqing can deal elemental burst damage. Well, the reverse is true as well for Fischl as well, because essentially you can, you know, swap over from Keqing and Tighnari, bring that energy over to Fischl using Kelter's Art, and then use Liu Su to give Fischl 1 energy at the start as well when she's blank, and therefore using that elemental burst. But you know, the reality is, Keqing's elemental burst is probably better than Fischl because she can deal 1 more piercing damage. So yeah, that's that. So this is basically the energy package, but not to forget, we also have the Elemental Resonance energy package because we are playing 2 Electro characters, and therefore we'll be able to pay 1 Electro die to increase the energy by 1. And I found this to be really, really helpful most of the time when trying to get a big Tighnari hit, because Tighnari's Elemental Burst only costs 2 energies, right? So the quicker you can get it up and running, the better, and yeah, it really just puts your opponents under lots of pressure. So to summarize, what is this deck trying to do? Basically, start with Fischl first, use Oz to apply lots of electro damage across your opponent's entire team. Next, go into Tighnari, use his elemental skill so that you can set up his charge attacks, and then use his charge attacks wisely so that you'll be able to create the Cluster Bloom arrow and deal a lot of end phase annoying damage, right? And then finally, finish up the game with Keqing and the piercing damage because Fischl and Tighnari will be able to chip down your opponent's damage, and therefore 3 piercing damage can pick up 1 or 2 cheeky knockouts every now and then. So yeah, very, very straightforward, easy to play team, easy to play deck. And yeah, I definitely prefer Tighnari over Collei after playing this for quite a few times. So let's go into the gameplay. and let me know what you think about this deck. If you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, let me know, and let me know about some ways that we can make this deck better. And yeah, if you enjoyed this deck so far, do like and subscribe to the channel. So in the first match, we are going to be playing against the team that I've already shown you a little bit of footage from. Basically the Razor, Xiangling and Tighnari deck. So this is a pretty interesting deck because they probably have a few of the similar ideas and strategies as I had, which is to create lots of little things to create lots of different end-phase elemental reaction damage to annoy and chip down your opponents while finally having a finisher in Razor, while my finisher is Keqing in this case. So this is a pretty interesting deck. I thought it was very fun to play against. But yeah, let's go into the game proper. So as you have seen earlier in the ideal turn 1 section, basically I'm just trying to reroll the dice in order to get some Electro dice to play Fischl, as she is my preferred starting character. You will also see that within my starting hand, I actually rewrote quite a few things. I rewrote everything except for Paimon and Leave It To Me. Reason for that is because when I saw this team, my idea, or rather my impression, is that this is a team that is trying to do a lot of elemental reactions against me, and therefore the more I can cycle away to another character, the better from my defensive point of view. So for example, if they have already dealt a lot of pyro application on me, if I want to prevent any sort of burning damage, if I want to prevent any sort of overload damage, I would need Katheryne or I need Leave It To Me in order to, you know, swap over to another character that doesn't already have some sort of elemental reaction. So that is basically why I kept Leave It To Me, and I tried to reroll everything else other than Paimon because I was trying to look for a Katheryne, which I very luckily was able to find one. So you've probably seen this, how this played out in the ideal starting hand section. Basically, by the end of the first turn, I was able to deal at least either dendro or electro damage to my opponent's board, and this is good from my perspective because it narrows down what I need to do in order to keep that Quicken pressure against my opponent, because they already have, for example, 2 of them already have electro damage applied, right? So I will do my best to use Tighnari's dendro attacks to apply Quicken against them and to get that damage buff. So I still think this is the right play, even though Tighnari is doing pretty low now, only 5 damage left, or rather 5 HP left. I still left him in the open because I don't believe that any of my opponents could finish me in one shot, because none of them have the burst available. But the key thing about this Quicken deck is that I cannot afford to have Tighnari die too early. I need to knock out my opponent's team first and set up a lot of Quicken damage and dendro damage before I can allow Tighnari to die. So basically, in other words, Tighnari is my pivot character. I need, or rather he's my catalyst, right? I need him to stick around so that he can continue to buff Fischl and Keqing's attacks. But that said, I still kind of chose to attack with Tighnari to deal a lot of damage across the board. I don't kill the Tighnari, but I am able to bring the Tighnari down to 1 HP. And that was a risk I was willing to take because I saw that my opponent only had 2 dice left and they were unlikely to be able to attack my Tighnari for 3 damage. So that was a gamble that I took, and it did pay off because I'm now able to play my food, give Tighnari some sort of recovery, and then swap back over to Fischl. I think I'm trying to swap back to Fischl because after this turn, Oz dies, and also from their view, they're able to do a lot of damage to me. Their Goba is able to do 2 damage, Burning is able to do 1 damage, and then they are able to use the Dendro Catalyst Arrow to refresh their Burning, and then also deal a total of 5 damage to Fischl. So I needed to swap over to either Fischl or Keqing to take that 5 damage so that my Tighnari doesn't die. So the reason why I chose Fischl is because now I'll be able to play Oz immediately. On top of that, I also wanted to keep Keqing alive for as long as possible because she has a greater damage output as compared to Fischl and Tighnari. So basically Keqing was just, or rather Fischl was my sacrificial lamb. So the game plan here is to re-roll everything to get some Electro dice and also Dendro dice because I want to play Boss right now and then swap over to Tighnari for some quicker damage. And this is actually getting a little bit dicey for me because my opponent now has Xiangling's burst setup, and that is actually pretty lethal in combination with Razor's skill, because essentially Razor attacks me for 3 electro damage. Xiangling's burst will be able to add 2 more pyro damage plus overload damage to do a total of, I believe, 7 damage against one of my characters. So I really didn't like the idea of that. But unfortunately I wasn't able to take out the Xiangling in time, and they do have the Xiangling burst available. Luckily for me, I have Katheryne and I was able to swap over to Tighnari as soon as possible to get some damage down to get rid of Xiangling. The reason why I decided to bring Tighnari out and potentially risk the safety of Tighnari is because my opponent cannot attack in the first place, they only have 1 dice. Second reason is because I would rather have Tighnari lose his life right now as compared to other characters in case they're able to attack somehow, because Razor already has Dendro attached to him. So yeah, that was the thought process behind that. So now I was able to deal a total of 4 damage, but because of the Millilith Helm, Razor just eats up 2 of the damage. That is super annoying, but luckily my Keqing survives. Admittedly, if Razor were to attack me with some sort of electro damage, Keqing will take the 4, and or rather she won't take the 4, she'll just be overloaded and she'll be forced into Fischl. But this was intentional as well because I need Fischl to sacrifice herself. Reason for that is because if you kind of watch how Razor attacks me now, Keqing gets overloaded, I get ultimately swapped over to Fischl, and then Fischl takes the beat of Xiangling's elemental burst. So if I had Tighnari stay on, Tighnari would die right now, and I didn't want that because I wanted him to continue to deal a little bit of Hydro or rather Dendro damage towards the end of this turn. So I swapped over to Keqing just so that Fischl would die and I have the ability to swap back into Keqing to deal even more damage. My opponent tries to kill off Keqing and succeeds in doing that because of Xiangling's elemental burst, and now I have Tighnari left in the back to do 3 damage to my opponent, and yeah, took the win there. So GG's to my opponent. That was a pretty fun interactive game. This was just a really interesting deck that they have, so yeah, I had fun playing against that. Next up we have a Diluc melt deck. I think I have something similar to this effect in one of my previous videos. Must have been my Eula deck, I believe, or I had some other Diluc melt deck. But yeah, Diluc melt is just really good. Don't sleep on it. Very threatening because Chongyun and Diluc are both bombs, right? And the second thing I wanted to share is that this is actually my second round against this player. I actually lost against them in my first round, and you know, as all good YouTubers do, I only show the matches where I win. So yeah, this is the second round whereby I managed to beat the opponent, and it was a really interesting back and forth here. I did kind of veer away from some of my usual play patterns here, so thanks to the opponent I managed to kind of challenge myself to play things a little bit differently. But what remains the same, what remains constant, is that I start with Fischl, I play so that I can get as much free value from the get-go as possible, and I set up Oz. Well, and on the other hand, they also set up Chongyun because they know how powerful the Chongyun infusion, current infusion can be for Diluc. And that is super annoying, right? Because essentially they can swap over to Diluc now, Diluc can deal normal attack to me, which is cryo damage, and then they can deal elemental damage, elemental skill damage, which then becomes melt damage to take a total of 8 damage or 8 HP off my characters. So that is really powerful.
I'll lead the way.
So I do the thing whereby I play Liusu and then I just try to set up Tighnari's burst and also set up his charge attacks. Reason why I do that is because at the end of this phase, Oz will be able to deal, I believe, 2 damage here, bringing Diluc down to 6. And with that Quicken buff, it just means that either Tighnari or Fischl or Keqing or anyone that has some sort of elemental burst will be able to bring Diluc just down to 1 HP. Even though 1 HP doesn't actually kill Diluc, it does bring him under slight pressure from either of my characters, because if they were to swap over to Chongyun and if I can set up Tighnari really quickly again, it just means that Diluc just dies from Tighnari's piercing. So that was the aim that I was trying to go for, because after playing the first game with this person, what I realized is that Diluc and Chongyun are absolute bombs. You cannot leave them untouched with their burst setup. So I need to get rid of them as soon as possible, as compared to, you know, allowing Bennett to buff them every single turn with Bennett's burst. So that was the idea. So I swapped over to Keqing because Tighnari already had some sort of elemental reaction on him. I didn't want him to die yet, didn't want him to take any sort of melt damage death. So what I did was I chose to go into Keqing, play Kalx's Art, and then give Keqing an elemental burst to bring Diluc down to 1 HP, while also dealing a ton of damage, or rather 3 piercing damage to both Bennett and Chongyun. So in terms of my next moves, I have 2 choices. I can either just keep Keqing as my active character and play the food, or I can keep her in, play Liben and absorb 2 dice, or I can also swap to another character to take the fall, so that my characters don't die, right? But what I decided to do is to, I think I keep Keqing in here because I want her to be the active character, or rather I don't want to swap into another character so that I can start first in the next round. So basically, yep, I play the Liben, I keep Keqing as active, and I don't think my opponent will be able to play or attack me in any way, right? Like, if they have to Paradise, then yeah, of course Keqing dies, but I was betting on the fact that they don't have those 2 Paradise, or rather Paradise, so that was a good little gamble there that was rewarded. And I was actually pretty glad that they swapped into Chongyun, because what this means right now is that I think... yeah, so this is where I wish I had Katheryne, right? Because if I had Katheryne, I could swap over into Tighnari, and then I can play the Elemental Resonance to give Tighnari +1 energy and then just play the burst. But because I don't have Katheryne, I will not be able to snipe both Chongyun and Diluc right now. That said, it felt like it was still the best play to go into Tighnari, because Tighnari already has Cryo applied to him, and therefore there was no value for my opponent to use Chongyun against Tighnari. And yeah, and if they were to try to attack Tighnari, Tighnari doesn't die and Chongyun and Diluc both die, and therefore they must swap into Bennett. So I just used the Liusu to fix some dice because my roll is absolutely massive for this turn. And I go into the Tighnari burst to snipe off Diluc.
I'll uproot you!
And deal a ton of damage to Bennett as well. So this is kind of where I wish I had respected Bennett a little bit more, because I believe they are able to kill me with their Pyro Resonance, if not wrong. Yep. with the Pyro Resonance, they are now able to deal a total of 8 damage to Tighnari. Meaning that he dies, which I could have prevented by having given Tighnari the hash brown.
Let's finish this quickly.
Oh well, you live and you learn, right? So this is where I basically just go all in and try to defeat the Bennett, because my opponent has 5 elemental dice now. If I were to end my turn then, I am definitely dead. I definitely do not have 2 characters at the end of this turn. But this was not a good situation for me either, because this means that they can basically, even if they don't have any Karo dice, they can burn their entire hand, use Chongyun's elemental skill to kill off Keqing. So even though it seems like it's a good position for me, I don't think it's that great a position at all. You can tell that my opponent is really thinking very hard right now, because I'm sure they have some sort of utility that they can play within the hand. So yep, they just go for the kill, they try to kill off Keqing, which I feel like is probably... I don't know, I'm not sure if that was the right call. I think they should have just ended their turn, fed their Lieben, and then they can start first, get a lot of extra dice, and kill off my Keqing in the next turn by starting first. But now, because they kill off my Keqing, I was able to start first. This is where I decided that I really want to respect Chongyun a little bit, just by playing the hash brown, just in case they have any other sort of buffs, right, to kill off my Fischl. Because the line I was thinking of here is that maybe they have star signs, they have Adeptus Temptation, and then they can eat the temptation to kill off Fischl. So would have dealt 9 damage anyway, but I thought, you know, let's just play it safe and eat the hash brown. But yeah, so lucky for me, my opponent probably didn't get what they wanted to find with the use of the Chef Mao. So yeah, managed to win the game here. So GG to my opponent, pretty good game, great playing with you for the 2 different matches. And yeah, that is everything for this guide. If you have any comments, do like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!